What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Chase's Sports News. I'm your host, Chase Coburn, here with you today. The NFL Draft is officially in the rearview mirror. I'm going to give you three winners and three losers from the NFL Draft. Not necessarily the three biggest winners or the three biggest losers, but three teams I thought had a pretty good draft that I would love to showcase and kind of explain their philosophy. And then three teams where they may not be the three biggest losers, but three teams where I question the trajectory from what they did in the NFL Draft. We're going to break that down as well right here on Chase's Sports News. Hope you guys do enjoy. Please subscribe, follow, share, do what you need to do to keep up with the content, NBA lottery, NBA playoffs, NFL schedule release, continuous MLB coverage during the season, and so much more right here on Chase's Sports News. You're not going to want to miss out. Please subscribe. It helps the channel a ton and is completely for free. We'd love for you guys to keep up with all the fun content we have coming up soon, especially as we enter the summer with a lot of fun things planned you guys are not going to want to miss. I also will say I was live on Bleacher Report during the 6th round of the NFL Draft alongside Connor Rogers and Trevor Sikkema. I'll put the link in the description below to my video with them, as well as a timestamp for when you guys can view my segment with Sikkema and Rogers. It was certainly a lot of fun to break down the ins and outs of this draft with them, so please be sure to check that out on Bleacher Report. And thanks so much to Connor, Trevor, and the entire Bleacher Report team for having me on last Saturday. My first winner here from the NFL Draft, I really, really like what the Buffalo Bills did in this draft, and I think they got the steal of the entire draft in selecting Skylar Bell, the wide receiver out of UConn in the 4th round. And look, UConn, a lot of people don't view them as a premier football school. They're more of a basketball school, but that doesn't take away, number one, for the fact that they had a 9-4 season last year, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Bell was a consensus All-American last year. He has versatility to be a slot receiver, which is how I think many NFL teams viewed him, but he also has the high contested catch rate, the fluid route running, the monster, yards after the catch, YAC ability to, I believe, really be a pawn and a chess piece to where you can kind of plug and play anywhere on the offense. Do not let his 5'11" height be a hindrance, because I think he's proven that he could play anywhere on an NFL offense. As someone who was personally a beat reporter for UConn football this past season, living in Connecticut, I covered Skylar a lot as a beat reporter for UConn, both as a player and as a person. I think he's just as good a leader and a teammate as he is a player from what I've seen. And I think if the Bills use him correctly, he has tremendous star potential. I really had him as a 2nd or 3rd rounder. The fact that they got him at pick 126 and not among, one of the top receivers like I thought he'd be selected as after he was one of the best receivers in college last year, I think that's a complete steal. Same goes with Zane Durant in the 6th round. And look, he didn't have a great season last year, like the 1st round mock that he had last year, but explosive, violent, aggressive. That's really what you want out of an edge rusher. I think he could be a star if he reaches his full potential as, again, a guy who many people viewed as a 1st or 2nd round pick going into the 2025 college football season. And not only that, but the Bills were able to accumulate so much talent via so many trades. They made the most trade downs in the NFL Draft this year, but I also feel like they were still able to get the pieces that they wanted. They traded down a handful of times from eventually pick 26 to pick 35, and they still landed the defensive lineman out of Clemson and TJ Parker, a guy who I had them picking at pick 26, and he's a guy who has been consistently productive. He had more tackles for loss over the past 3 seasons than games played with the Clemson Tigers. And so I think they built positions of need. They added depth where they needed to add depth, and I think they were really able to get some steals during day 3. I think it really was, again, on the surface, without seeing any of this come to fruition just yet, a really, really big win and a really, really good draft for Brandon Beane, whose seat going into this draft was as hot as they come. I think he did an absolutely incredible job in building a roster to surround Josh Allen and company and will be able to build a Super Bowl contender alongside them, to be able to accumulate that much talent, and then also the quality of talent that they got, especially in day 3. I thought it was a great draft from the Bills, and one that is really going under the radar. My second winner for this NFL draft, and a lot of people are going to say this is biased, but I think the Baltimore Ravens did have a great draft. And I think we say this with Baltimore every year because they are considered one of the most stable front offices in the National Football League, with Eric DeCosta at the helm, stable ownership, a lot more changes in Baltimore this year than ever before. But over the last 5 seasons, according to Draft Capital over expected, they've had the best overall value selections in the NFL draft for the last 5 years. I thought they really got what they needed in this draft. Vega Ioane in the 1st round, an immediate contributor at offensive line. Could they have gone Ruben Bain? Yes. Does Ioane really fit what they need more? Absolutely. And I think he's going to be a star. Then to get Zion Young out of Missouri in the 2nd round as an explosive and aggressive run stopper to complement Trey Hendrickson and play opposite Trey Hendrickson, who is more of a pass rusher. I think they're really going to feed off of each other really, really well on that defensive line now, with Jesse Minter at the helm and leading the show as the defensive play caller. And then with your next 2 picks, getting two really, really good wide receivers in Jacoby Lane out of USC and then Elijah Surratt out of Indiana. Both are touchdown getters and red zone contributors as pass catchers, which I think Baltimore really desperately needed. Even the little things. You lose two tight ends in free agency, you add two tight ends. You lost a punter in free agency, the best in the NFL, and Jordan Stout. They got the best punter in this entire class. And then I'll even bring this up. I think the Baltimore Ravens have done a really, really solid job with their undrafted free agent class so far, bringing in UConn quarterback Joe Fagnano and Vanderbilt quarterback Diego Pavia for really a tryout and a visit during rookie minicamp. I think that is huge. Those are two guys who played really, really well in college. You could see if one of them could be your quarterback 3 and maybe someone that could be on your roster long term. And then even Nick Dawkins at center out of Penn State. I think that's a huge win and somebody who could be a starter right away. So again, this is nothing surprising for Baltimore. I think EDC and this group always gets great value, but even more so than in previous years, I feel like they filled positions of need even more, which I thought was really, really huge for this team and something that they needed now with a new regime and a, new understanding in tow as they try to become immediate Super Bowl contenders after missing the playoffs shockingly last year with Lamar Jackson at the helm. And then my last winner, the third winner I will break down. Once again, I think the Cleveland Browns had a very, very good draft in accumulating top value and accumulating talent at picks lower than they should have gone at. Like last year, we talked about how they were able to get Mason Graham and Carson Schlesinger and Shedeur Sanders, and even having Dylan Gabriel in there. And we viewed Cleveland as having one of the best drafts. I think for Cleveland, they did have another great draft. I think until they find a quarterback, back-to-back seasons with great value selection, it's going to be a moot point. But with what they can control currently and with the infrastructure that was in place, I think this front office really did what they needed to do and set themselves up long-term by amplifying that infrastructure in place for when they do get a quarterback to trade down and yet still be able to get Spencer Fano in the first round. He's a high upside offensive lineman, very, very versatile, can play in multiple different positions. I love that for Cleveland. Then you go and grab KC Concepcion and Denzel Boston as two wide receivers who can complement each other and be future weapons for this offense. Then you go from having a very, very limited receiving core to now all of a sudden having a very, very a vast amount of options for Shedeur Sanders, Deshaun Watson, Dylan Gabriel, whoever is at the helm next year. And then I'll even look Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. I had the Browns taking him at 24 to go and get him at 58. That was one of the best value selections of the entire draft. You add in Taylor Green in the 6th round. I don't mind the bet on his athleticism. Maybe you use him other than quarterback. Maybe he is a quarterback for you. Either way, I don't mind the risk in the 6th round of getting a guy with just freakish athleticism and elusiveness. And then look, like last year I mentioned it, they got the guys they wanted. Carson Schlesinger won Defensive Rookie of the Year. I think Mason Graham's going to be great. You already have Myles Garrett. I think they're really, really solid defensively. And once they find a QB, I think they're setting themselves up really, really well long-term to be able to have success. So this season, again, whether it's Watson, Sanders, Green, now even Gabriel, whoever it is, if it's one of those 4 quarterbacks, I don't see the Browns being a postseason team. But they are laying the groundwork for when they do add a quarterback to be able to find success right away. And that is saying something for a franchise that has struggled mightily in the past, in the recent past, and in the kind of distant past as well. So I think it was a really, really great draft for the Browns and one that they desperately needed to follow up on what was a pretty solid draft class from the outside, or kind of from what we've seen so far from their 2025 draft class, to say the least. Those are 3 winners I wanted to break down. Now for 3 losers. Not everyone's going to love this. I think a lot of people are in agreement with me on this one. I don't love what the San Francisco 49ers did in this draft. And I think this team needed a lot of things. This is the team that I'm very, very low on. In my kind of way too early thoughts ahead of the 2026 season, I just didn't think they filled a lot of those needs. I think that the rushing game was awful last year, and it wasn't to a fault of Christian McCaffrey, right? He was getting a lot of carries and making an impact in the receiving game and being very, very durable and productive with what he was given. But that offensive line was very, very poor. And it wasn't the rushing talent that was the hindrance. And yet the solution is to take only 2 linemen and 8 picks, not one interior offensive lineman, and instead reach on Kalen Black in round 2 as the 3rd running back off the board, according to the Beast, which, Dane Brugler of The Athletic did send me exclusively. So I've been really looking into that. Huge shout out to Dane. But he was ranked 179th on his board in the running back 10 of the class. They took him with a 2nd round selection as the 3rd running back off the board. That's insane to me. And then they also took Zahan Stribling as the 6th receiver off the board in the 2nd round and took him over Denzel Boston He was ranked 67th and the wide receiver 11 in the class by the Beast. That's another reach. And this is nothing new from San Francisco, as Grant Cohn brilliantly pointed out to the general manager, John Lynch, and the head coach, and Kyle Shanahan, and as many others have pointed out in these days following the NFL draft. This is a team that has the worst value selections across the board. You look at Warren Sharp by draft capital over expected. They had the worst DCOE throughout this entire draft, and it wasn't even that close. And they have one of the worst DCOEs over the last 5 seasons, accumulatively, in the value of where they get their selections compared to the consensus board. And I understand their board may be different from the consensus, but to continuously reach on talent and really in inconsistent seasons not find enough depth, and then all of a sudden have these injury problems and have to have your head coach, one of, if not the best in the NFL, save everything every year. I think that is because they don't have a lot of depth and they don't have a roster that could really help them out quite a bit. I just don't love what they did in the draft. And it was another draft where with their highest value selections, they didn't get great value for the guys that they brought in. I just didn't love what John Lynch and the 49ers did. And for a team that's very, very injury prone and getting older, and I think the core is struggling and they're getting very, very expensive, it just wouldn't surprise me if this team starts to dwindle and phase out of Super Bowl championship contention, as I kind of brought up at the end of the NFL season for them, because I just don't really know where this team goes from here at this point. For my second loser that I want to break down, it's a team that a lot of people actually think did really well in the draft. Unlike most, I actually don't like what the Arizona Cardinals did in this draft. I don't really think they positioned themselves to be great in the short term or the long term. It has nothing to do with Jeremiah Love. I like Jeremiah Love. But to take him 3rd overall over Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles as 2 dominant defensive players, to take a running back that highly, to give him now, to kind of indirectly, because of where the selection was, the most guaranteed money to a running back in NFL history, that's just way too much of a risk to me. And it's very rare that you take a running back highly in the draft and prioritize that position over a pass rusher, over an offensive lineman, over a skill position weapon as a wide receiver or somebody along those lines. It's rare you take a running back in that spot and still be able to find success. And it's not an indictment on Jeremiah Love, who I think is a brilliant talent. That just seems like a reach to me at 3rd overall, especially for a team that was very, very poor defensively and did not have a great offensive line. And it wouldn't shock me. It doesn't even matter where Jeremiah Love was selected if it was by Arizona, because I do not believe they have the infrastructure in place to allow him to thrive. They were below average last year in pass block win rate, in run block win rate, and an overall, Pro Football Network grade. They weren't a great offensive line. They didn't have a great offensive line by the metrics last year. They didn't do much to improve upon that offensive line in the draft or in free agency. And like Ashton Genty in Las Vegas last year, I don't even think it matters the talent of the running back if they're behind a very, very poor offensive line. They're just going to struggle. And so I think it's going to be a waste until the Cardinals finally do build an offensive line. And it would have been better and in their best interest to improve upon a pass rush that was 28th in sacks last year, or improve upon an offensive line that was, I think, 27th in pass block win rate. It would have been much better to do that than add a running back and reach on a running back at 3rd overall. And then also, with their 3rd round selection, taking quarterback Carson Beck out of Miami. Again, it's not a disrespect to the player. I like Beck. I think he was a fine college player at Miami. But a lot of people don't think it's much of a risk to take a quarterback at day 2, which is not as much of a risk as day 1. But when you take a quarterback day 2, you still feel this sense of, we need to try him out. Like, at some point, we need to bet on him long term. And if they see any signs, like we saw with Tyler Shuck in New Orleans last year, you're going to stick with it. And in Shuck's case, I think he could be a great quarterback long term. But for Carson Beck, I'm not so sure. And they may see signs and want to maximize on that, like New Orleans, except unlike Shuck, I don't view Beck as a long-term starter. That's why I think they could be wasting 2 or 3 seasons in just searching through it and going through various quarterbacks because they took one here. I just don't know if now was the right time to take a quarterback in round 3. And I also just don't think it was good at all that they didn't add to the defense with any of their selections in day 1 or day 2, and they didn't add to that defense that was 27th in yards allowed per game last year and 29th in points allowed per game in inept pass rush. I just don't see why you don't prioritize that side of the football. And so I just think they don't really have a clear understanding of how are they trying to prioritize their future? If they really want to prioritize their future and lay the infrastructure, you take offensive linemen, you improve the defense, you get your guy a star wide receiver. You don't reach on a running back and then take a quarterback in the third round that you know you're going to commit to unnecessarily. I just don't love what the Arizona Cardinals did, and I don't think they set themselves up well for the short term or in the long term based off of the current construction of this Cardinals roster. And then last but not least here, for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I just don't know if I love what they did. I don't think they went for production in this draft. If you look at a chart by Next Gen Stats that I've been able to kind of see through my research, they were above average in what's called athletic score, but among the lowest in production score. And so Pittsburgh seemingly took a lot of risks on high upside guys, but I'm not quite sure that the guys that they took have as high upside as some may believe. Look, Maxi Wanachor, the offensive tackle out of Arizona State, I don't really think they wanted him. They wanted Vega Ioane. They wanted Mekhi Lemon. Both were gone because of trades that they weren't able to make or trades that happened that they weren't aware of when they were trying to move up. And so this really felt like more of a panic move for Pittsburgh. And then you go in the third round and you select Drew Allar. And like Arizona, it's just not a tremendous draft capital risk. But for me, it's too high to draft a quarterback where you know you're going to have to give him a chance. So what Pittsburgh is going to do is this is going to be a Kenny Pickett philosophy again, where I would have rather them taken Ty Simpson and had him develop. Instead with Drew Allar, if Rodgers doesn't come back, maybe he does, you're going to have a quarterback battle between a 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers, Drew Allar's coming off of some injuries, and then Will Howard, who we really have not seen at the pro level. That just doesn't really make sense to me. And there could be some other guys that are thrown in there as well that may be forgetting. I don't know if Drew Allar was the move there in the third round because, again, it's not a tremendous risk, but it's also too high to select someone where you know you're going to have to give him a chance. And it just feels like it's going to be Kenny Pickett over and over and over again because I don't like Allar like a Ty Simpson who could have developed under Rodgers and then eventually become the heir and the starter once Rodgers retired. I just think, honestly, they're going to be in the exact same position in 2 seasons. A very, very average team with a really, really good infrastructure that just doesn't have a quarterback because I think Allar has a strong arm, but he's not overly athletic. He has messy intangibles. It hurts his accuracy. And again, he's coming off of those serious injuries. And then you even go and draft a receiver with their second round pick. I don't think you really needed Bernard in that spot when you have Michael Pittman and when you have DK Metcalf. You've gone in consecutive off seasons and paid those guys decent amounts of cash. I don't think you needed another receiver in that spot. And so, look, I think Pittsburgh is set up very, very well to go 9-8 next season. But that is the same old, same old. And I think what they're doing is putting themselves even more where they were a few years ago with Kenny Pickett. I just don't think Drew Allar's the answer. They're going to treat him like he's the answer. And they're going to continuously start quarterbacks that aren't bad enough for them to completely give up on, but not good enough for them to win Super Bowls with. It's just Pittsburgh is stuck in purgatory, and I don't think this draft really changed anything in that regard for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this edition of Chase's Sports News, my biggest winners and losers from the NFL draft. Let me know what you guys think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments. And again, please stay tuned for more coverage coming up across collegiate and professional sports here on Chase's Sports News. And again, if you guys want to see my segment with Trevor and Connor live on Bleacher Report, please click the YouTube video in my description. It'll have some information on where you guys can find me in that live stream. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Signing off, I am your host, Chase Coburn, saying so long from Chase's Sports News.